Kunja Vihar. Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Vihari. Radha Madhava Kunja Vihari. Jayom Vishnupad Paramahamsa Parivijagacharya Astatarastasri Srimad His Divine Grace Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada Ki Gaura Premanandi. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. No, I've got a book, but maybe there's another book. Because if we can't chant the Sanskrit responsibly, I'll just say it.
This one?
I have it. I have it right here, but... Huh?
Inside that?
Canto 2, Chapter 10, Text 22. 2:10:22. Bodhyamanasya rishibhir Atmanasthajjidrikshata Karshnaut cha nirabhidyetam Disha stotram gunagraha Bodhyamanasya rishibhir Atmanasthajjidrikshataha Karshnau cha nirabhidyetam Disha strotram gunagraha Bodhyamanasya rishibhir Atmanasthajjidrikshataha Karnau cha Disham strotram gunagraha Bodhyamanasya rishibhir Atmanasthajjidrikshataha Karnau cha nirabhidyetam Disha strotram Bodhyamanasya rishibhir Atmanasthajjidrikshataha Karnau cha nirabhidyetam Disha srotram guna. Mataji's. Bodhyamanasya rishibhir Atmanasthajjidrikshataha Karnau cha nirabhidyetam Disha strotram gunagraha Bodhyamanasya rishibhir Atmanasthajjidrikshataha Karnau cha nirabhidyetam Disha strotram gunagraha Bodhyamanasya, desiring to understand. Rishibhihi, by the authorities. Atmanaha, of the Supreme Being. Tat, that. Jidrikshataha, Ikshataha, when he desired to take up. Karnau, the ears. Cha, also. Nirabhidyetam, became manifest. Dishaha, the direction, or the god of air. Shrotram, the power of hearing. Guna graha, and the objects of hearing. Translation: by development of the desire of the great sages to know, the ears, the power of hearing, the controlling deity of hearing, and the objects of hearing became manifest. The great sages desired to hear about the self. Purport by Srila Prabhupada. As stated in the Bhagavad Gita, by advancement of knowledge, one should try to know about the Supreme Lord, the summum bonum of everything. Knowledge does not mean knowledge only of the laws of nature or physical knowledge, which are working by the direction of the Lord. The scientists are eager to hear about the physical laws working in material nature. They are eager to hear through the medium of radio and television about things taking place far away from them on other planets, but they should know that the power of hearing and the instruments for hearing were given to them by the Lord for hearing about the capital S, self, or about the Lord. Unfortunately, the power of hearing is misused in hearing the vibration of mundane affairs. The great sages were interested in hearing about the Lord through Vedic knowledge and nothing more. That is the beginning of oral reception of knowledge. Bhagavatam is the answer to all questions. The inquisitive spirit of great sages, there's some chronology and there's some application of that chronology. In the unfolding of creation, there's, why creation? And one answer is we desired it. But then the initial desiring it originates from, as the description is being presented here, very elevated personalities who desire to understand truth with a capital T, or self with a capital S, or the Supreme Lord. Desiring to know, then the faculties for knowing, the ear, the power of hearing. So Sankhya has these different parts, and the parts fit together to make the system, life. And then there's the purpose, spiritual purpose. Even within this world, there's a spiritual purpose for all things. And not knowing what that spiritual purpose of all things is, then things get misused. And when things get misused, we have problems. By the laws of nature, there's problems. And it gets very complex. So how to keep things from getting very complex? It's the inquisitiveness to know. That's where it starts. And then when that inquisitive to know is connected with the knowledge, or that which is coming from the absolute source of everything, which reveals where everything comes from, then that's the proper use of things. and including the instruments for perceiving those things. So that here, the next one is the eyes, and this one is the ears. So the senses have a function. They have a material function. The material function is forgetfulness, and the spiritual function is remembrance, or knowing the source of all things. So as Prabhupada would commonly do, it's not just, it can sound like bashing. He's bashing scientists and bashing this one and that one. It may look like that. However, at least my understanding is that the reason for that pointing out the error of a material way of life is to help us become detached from the material way of life. The purpose is detachment, and the opposite is there's attachment, or you can say there's faith. There's faith in things. There's faith in scientists and science. We've all experienced it. For example, here's a for example. Just hearing Prabhupada say in a lecture, one man was visiting him in Mayapur, and he was asking Prabhupada in a private discussion. Prabhupada was explaining. He wanted to know what's the proof of the soul. What's the proof of the soul? And Prabhupada explained. I just told them in Shruti. Shruti Praman. That's the proof. End of story. Well, that's not sufficient for me because I want another kind of proof. So how can you perceive that which is not available through sense perception? Then you use other faculties. You use inference and logic. We discussed this briefly. The out-of-body experience example. It's not a proof. There might be some other explanation. But then how do you what's the other explanation? That when the seat of consciousness is not the body or the brain that's within the body. The seat of consciousness is not that. And the out-of-body, the multitude of examples of out-of-body experiences confirm the seat of consciousness is not the body. So if there's this other entity, it's not the body, but is the seat of consciousness, what is that other entity? Give it a name, whatever culture one is in, call it something. But we'll just, it's the soul, and it's distinct from the body. It's not a proof, there might be some other explanation. But by inference, that's the reasoning power, utilizing also, the auditory power, the hearing about somebody that had an out-of-body experience, with details and details. I forgot to mention, when I was giving this other example of the medical surgeon, the heart surgeon in Seattle, when her patient reported that they had about an out-of-body experience that went up to the ceiling, across the ceiling to the window, out the window, up 2 flights of floors, and they were looking inside the janitor's closet and described what they saw inside the janitor's closet, which was locked. But there was also, they saw a pair of sneakers on a ledge that you can't see from the inside. So in this book this lady wrote, I forgot to mention, she checked, and then the sneakers were there. You can't see from inside. But the out-of-body experience person saw and described the sneakers. A rip by the toe and 2 different shoelaces, and well, maybe there's some other explanation. You can't, it's not proof. Sense perception and reason are not proofs. It infers, inference infers. So what's the proof? And so if you don't have acknowledgement of Shruti, then you won't know. And if you have the authority of Shruti that supports sense perception and the inference of logic and reason. So, but people, why did Prabhupada bash the scientists so much? He explained, I mean, not openly, but on occasion he would explain, it's because people have blind faith in science. If science says, okay, and if science doesn't say, I doubt. Like this, what's the proof of the soul? Shruti. Supposing you don't have faith in Shruti, then you're not going to know. You can infer, and then some other person that's good at logic may come up with it. Maybe it's something else, and maybe it's something else. And then that gets discarded. I'm focusing on Prabhupada's bashing the scientists. And those who we know from Bhagavad Gita, it takes many, bahunam janmanamante gyanavan mam prapajate vasadev saramiti samahat. So where's that philosopher or scientist that has come to that conclusion? Well, these two books that I became familiar with, Dr. Sabam from Emory University, and I forget the lady's name, in Seattle, came to the conclusion, it looks like the seat of consciousness is other than the body or the brain. Because when there's cardiac arrest, blood doesn't go to the brain. There's no, the EKG registers, there's no activity in the brain, but consciousness is going on. So you infer by logic. Just this morning I was listening to Prabhupada speaking really strongly about, this is in Mayapur, 1974, October, from Queen Kunti's prayers. He was on fire. We need to confront the scientists. Being very, very open, very explicit, very blunt. He didn't say because people have blind faith in the scientists, but he's saying because they're nonsense. They're very learned and they're often well spoken. So who are we? Because we're not so learned, we're not so well spoken. So how are we going to confront such people? We shouldn't confront such people if you're not prepared. But if you prepare, then some basic things can be indicated without simply saying, well, the Vedas say so. So there. Here's one more. There's many. One more that I learned from Sadhuputta. In his book, Vedic Cosmology and Astronomy, I think that's the title of the book, there's a whole section, chapter, where he did substantial research and has drawings to indicate what cosmology picture exists in different parts of the world. And it wasn't just his research. There are scholars that did the research. So he just took up what the scholars that did their research found. And in short, there's not a one-to-one correlation, but almost the same, very, very, very similar correlation between the cosmology picture, and you name spots all around the world, Siberia, South America, Scandinavia, Africa, all over the place. Similar cosmology, pictures. So then these scholars said there's three possible explanations. One, the living entity is DNA hardwired, that's what they're going to picture, cosmology. Not so likely. Second, just chance. Not so likely. Third, there was once one culture all over the world. And the one culture had a picture of cosmology, and over time, cultures changed, but the picture of cosmology remained intact with some changes. And they concluded, we're not very comfortable with that one, but it's the most logical. It's not a proof. But you take empiric stuff, and when you go with it, there's something. So Prabhupada's approach, this is just one part of what's here, is misuse of the faculty of hearing. And on and on and on it goes. People, they're inquisitive to know what's out there. It's still going on. Just, send something up again. Let's go to the moon again. So people are curious what's out there. But the curiosity, then where does that lead to? Like, where does everything come from? What's out there? What is that something? It's the senses reaching out into the world, and then the universe. What's the structure of the universe? What's it all about? Where does it all come from? It's the inquisitiveness minus the real purpose for which the capacity of hearing comes leads to misuse of the faculty of hearing and the wanting to know, because that's what's here. Bodhya manasya rishibhir. The authorities desiring to know Atmanas, the Supreme Being, recognizing that the Supreme Lord, Jagrikshataha, he provided ears and the power of hearing and the objects of hearing. So why creation? We desired it, or at least rishis desired, but their desire is important. Their desire wasn't just, what's it all about? Their desire was specifically the Supreme. So then it gets, more covered, darker, darker. Lower species. But devolution, not evolution. You with me? Dhruta Karma spent about a decade on archaeological findings to, he had a purpose to disprove human evolution. To disprove human evolution. The scholars of Europe, one particular scholar named Macaulay, he came up with this idea that there's too much regard for the Vedas. He was a Christian. Scholarly people are developing fascination with the Vedas. And we have to stop that so we can maintain Christianity. It's like, that's it. So the way to do it, he indicated, was those things that are in the Vedas that are empirical, like with time, with numbers, measurements of time and space, where there's numbers, then we have to find through archaeology evidence that says it's not. And his conclusion was, as following him came Darwin, who then made it popular. It's saying, in the course of time, archaeological findings will prove this, and he went around and became a popular guy and wrote books about it. But there was a scholar before him. So, knowing that history, Dhruta Karma spent a lot of time in a lot of places all around the world finding museums, and found that in the back part of those museums, the archaeology museums, they had artifacts that they didn't put on display because it didn't support what was on display. There were anomalies. And then so he gathered the anomalies, which are considered by those supporting Darwinian evolution, the anomalies that just get put in the back room, and lots of it. He has photographs of what's in the back rooms. And the findings are, it's not what Darwin said. That's, the evolution book. And so then he wrote a second book, Human Devolution, saying everything comes from the higher beings. It's like this. This is not saying exactly that. But the rishis, the higher beings existed before there was even the power of hearing and the power of sight and the objects of hearing, the objects of sight, and the ability to, hear the sounds, etc. For accessing the Supreme, the source of all things. Anyway, Prabhupada doesn't deal with all of that in this purport, but the foundation is there. And in this lecture that I heard this morning from Mayapur in October of 1974, Prabhupada was demanding we must become qualified to defeat the scientists, to respond to their, misleading understandings. Now, just as a detail, during that same lecture, Prabhupada supported evolution, but not evolution of consciousness, but evolution of species. From aquatics, plants, insects, birds, animals, human. Padma Purana, it describes like this. So there's a hierarchy, but it's not that they came into being first, chronologically, and then they evolved, matter evolves into life, not that. That's the misleading part. But there's a covered, most covered, less covered, more evolved consciousness, and with that species, and the souls move through those species. And it's all part of God's creation. Just like in the Bhagavatam, in the third canto and elsewhere, the Prajapatis produced the species. Before there's the species, there's the Prajapatis. And somehow, doesn't describe the how, but somehow the various species were manifest through the wives of Daksha and their husbands. So devolution from the Bhagavatam perspective. But then when living entities enter into the lowest state of manifest forms of life on earth, it starts in the water. And sometimes he would describe at the end of the cosmic annihilation, there's water everywhere, and gradually the water starts to recede, and then there's forms of life within the water, etc., etc. In cycles of creation, the living entities in water come first. Anyway, the living entity can see only when the Lord sees. This is the previous verse. The living entities can smell only when the Lord smells, and so on. The idea is that the living entity cannot do anything independently. That was text 21. So back to 22. The living entities and inquisitive people, they want to know. That's good. It's a good characteristic. But what method is used to know? And what is the object? The fascination may be, as is described here, the laws of nature. Fascination with the laws of nature, the push and pull, the cause and effect, and then manipulate. Once you understand the cause and effect, you manipulate. And then you make a product, knowing the push and the pull. I remember, you probably also remember, when research was going into drones, the money for the research going into drones, how to remotely make some airplane fly, was military. They've got the money. The same with cell phones. Same with technology that we're using. It was the technology came from the government in military warfare. They spent gobs and gobs and gobs and gobs of money, and they figured out how to send signals through one broadcaster, one receiver. Then it became cell phone technology. I mean, that's my understanding, maybe oversimplification. And drones, now it's popular. And kids play with drones and fly over places and take pictures. But the real purpose is to drop bombs and to spy and, to do military things with drones. That's their interest. Who's the lawmaker? I just spent a bunch of time on the light of the Bhagavad, and there's a whole section on the lawmaker. Inquisitive persons not just interested in the laws, the cause and effect and the push and the pull and manipulation of those laws for some purpose of sense gratification, but to connect with the Supreme. So that's what this verse is saying. Unfortunately, the power of hearing is misused in hearing the vibrations of mundane affairs. The great sages were interested in hearing about the Lord through Vedic knowledge and nothing more. That is the beginning of oral reception of knowledge. Okay, so there's our morning discussion. See if there's some comments or questions.
Just for the discussion. So the method to know is by devotion and service, which is not available to the people outside.
It's available. They're not wanting it. I mean, go ahead. What's your point?
Yeah, that's what, like, people outside, like, they don't know a concept of devotional service, then they cannot, they don't have bhakti, so then they cannot understand that it's going vice versa. So that's what my trying to understand. Like, it's basically not available to people outside.
I'm trying to understand what you're trying to understand. Could you try again explaining what you're trying to understand?
Yeah. So, to really see the things as they are, like, they need the devotion and service, then
We need the source of knowing and the means of connecting with that source. The means of connecting with that source is devotional service. We also need the source of transcendental knowledge. Now, the back to your question. What's the question? The people that are unfamiliar with the process of bhakti, process of devotional service, what to speak of the source of transcendental knowledge. Therefore, they have some idea of understanding something, but it's a misunderstanding. And they may be very invested in that misunderstanding. Often people are. So what is it that you're trying to understand?
journey for them is
Meet a devotee.
almost,
Meet a devotee.
yeah, so then it's almost impossible, or very hard at least, because they're very far from that.
Yeah. Well, then the devotees have to become active, not complacent. Without any expectation, because some people are going to say no. It's like, somebody was describing doing door-to-door book distribution. It's very humbling because most people are not interested. Or there are a number of people not interested, and it's not encouraging because we want results. So, nonetheless, it's not just door-to-door book distribution, it's the whole, any A to Z effort. Public Harinam, presence by technology and websites and this and that and the other thing. Different ways of reaching out to people that don't have access to the bhakti process nor the source of transcendental knowledge. Both are needed, and they don't have either. Many cases. So now, that's the circumstance. What to do? The circumstance is what it is, and Chaitanya Mahaprabhu recommended this reaching out. We say preaching, but in essence, is giving the holy name, getting people somehow to make contact with the holy name.
And just one sharing, I used to work in a company where we used to do some technical enhancement for video monitoring, and that was funded by DHS. So that's how it started, and then it spilled into the retail market and so on. So when you are saying that, how everything is coming, or at least the development is coming from military, so I'm just correlating to that.
It's one of the biggest sources because they have big funding. And they're, personalities that want to develop war technology, and so they invest public money in war technology, and then it becomes commercialized. They get their money back by selling the product. You have something?
Hare Krishna Maharaj. So my question is about the creation.
My mind is just stuck for a moment on reaching out. When Chaitanya Mahaprabhu instructed Lord Nityananda, don't come back to Puri for Rath Yatra each year anymore. I want you to go to Bengal. I appeared in this world to deliver the holy name. My mother asked me to stay here, so I'm staying here. So you do this on my behalf. Here's a group of very enthusiastic persons. They can go with you and spread the holy name all over Bengal. And Bengal at that time was much bigger than Bengal today. So they went. Nityananda didn't want to be separated from Lord Chaitanya, but he accepted his order, and he went, and they were just chanting and carrying on in a mad way. Which way to Bengal? And somebody would say that way, so they went that way. And then they realized they were getting closer to Bengal. Which way? They said that way. But so they're just traveling like madmen, chanting and infusing people with faith in the holy name and chanting of the holy name. So they reached one place where there was a cruel Muslim leader. He was notorious for being cruel. And they reached that place. And in the middle of the night, and I'm trying to remember the name of the follower of Mahaprabhu, and I'm not remembering his name, but he went to that Muslim ruler's home, his palace, in the dead of night. And he went right inside. The guard was asleep. He went right inside and started calling out loudly, "Chant the holy name of Krishna." And wrote this cruel leader up. The cruel leader woke up. He went to the balcony, looked down, and saw this mad, ecstatic devotee calling up to him, "Chant Krishna's name, chant Krishna's name." And for some reason, the Muslim ruler said like, "I'm going to arrest you." He just said, "Tomorrow. Say Krishna's name tonight, it's too late." And the devotee started dancing in the hallway, dancing and dancing. "You said Krishna's name, you said Krishna's name," went dancing out the front door. His purpose was to get him to say Krishna's name, because he had such faith in uttering Krishna's name. In this way, the associates of Mahaprabhu, the associates of Lord Nityananda, spread the glories of the holy name throughout the land, because they had that was their mandate. They were empowered to do it, and that's what they did. So how does it happen? The people that don't know is somebody has to be the medium, at least, for them to begin. At least for them to begin. And that's we want that we wish that it goes more in the favorable side than the offensive side or the vilification side. Hare Krishna people are bad, but they're saying Krishna's name. So strategies of how to engage those that don't know what the process is, nor do they know how to connect with that source, that transcendental knowledge source. We distribute books, or we conduct programs in such a way people can hear the teachings, and that's part of our life. And then just hearing the holy name is also part of our life. And then there's strategies that help all of that. That's Lord Chaitanya's Sankirtan movement. Now back to your question.
Yes, Maharaj. So, the creation is talking about this material creation. So, before that there are higher beings existed, right, the sages, as per this verse. So, they were desiring to hear, but they already had that capacity to hear.
They had the capacity to hear.
So, it's talking about the people in this material world. They wanted the people in the material world to hear about the Lord or hear about.
They wanted to hear, not just they wanted people in the world to hear. They wanted to hear.
So, the reason I was asking that question from the previous verse also, Maharaj, the Lord desired to see Himself. That's why the eyes manifested and the sun manifested. So, the Lord can always see it, even without, of course, He has
Without
the
the
eyes.
sun, he can see.
Yeah. So, He has the eyes. So, but He says that the eyes manifested because He desired to see Himself.
I'm listening.
Yeah, there is a confusion that, they're already existing.
Which is the chicken and egg question? What comes first?
No, from the material world perspective, I understand. I'm talking about from the spiritual world, the Lord can see and they are already there. So the Lord wanted to see Himself. He will be able to see Himself. He already has the eyes from the spiritual perspective. So from the material creation, I understand that it is created. Because it says that the Lord
I'm trying to understand what is it a cause-effect question? If the Lord can already see, then why does He desire to see? Because He can already see.
Yes, Maharaj.
So it's a cause-effect question, because He desires to see, therefore the sun and so many things come. He desires to hear, and therefore these things happen. The ear, the objects to hear about, the auditory capacity. So it's a cause-effect question.
Yes.
That's one way of looking at what you're... which comes first? Which is the cause and what's the effect? Why is He even desiring to see when He can see? That's your question. There's the Prakriti is, as we heard Sunday evening, one of the 5 subject matters of Bhagavad Gita is Prakriti, and Prakriti is eternal. Karma is the one that's not eternal, but Prakriti is eternal. But Prakriti is sometimes manifest, sometimes not manifest. So within the realm of Prakriti, there's the objects, let's say, of sight, the objects of sight, and the power to see is different than the objects. So the Lord's seeing can mean, one of the ways of He can see is, what about the objects of sight? And then the means by which not only He can see, because He sees, just like Prabhupada's example, when there isn't light, we can't see. So you need the sun to see, but the sun is the eye of Krishna, and by the sun seeing, then you can see. So the desire, for the Lord desire to see means see what? And then the means for seeing, the eye, it has to do with the relationship between Prakriti and Ishvara. So Ishvara doesn't need faculties or facilities because he's Ishvara. But for there to see the creation, there's the means of seeing the creation and the creation. And then as the Lord sees, then we can see, because the power of seeing comes from the one who is able to see, the source. Your question is a good question. Your question has to do with what's the relationship between Prakriti and Ishvara. You'll boil it down. Or why creation? Well, the Lord desired to see, the Lord desired to hear. Or here, in this morning's verse, it's the rishis desired. So wait a minute. I thought you were going to ask this one. Where do the rishis come from? That's next.
No, I had that question, but I was thinking they were higher beings. They might be there in the spiritual world. As the Lord desired to see, they also desired to hear.
Yeah, it's everything to do with avyakta and vyakta. It's something like the sensory power and the senses themselves. Those are both material. But then, where does the sensory power as well as the object of the senses come from? From the spiritual realm. Otherwise it doesn't exist. This is a reflection of that. A temporary and perverted reflection of that. So the question you asked specifically is, the Lord doesn't need anything to see. The Lord doesn't need anything to hear. But he desired to see, and so that precipitates desire to see the objects. They're in their unmanifest state. Let me just take your question and go to another place and come back to your question. In the first verse of the Chatur Sloki verses of Srimad Bhagavatam, no, it's not the first one, 2:9:33. There's the language sat and asat. Now we're accustomed to think of sat as that which is eternal, and asat was that which is temporary, which is the primary meaning. Prabhupada, and following our previous acharyas switched it. The manifest is the sat, and the unmanifest is the asat. So there was this question, what's that? I got an answer. It's in Prabhupada's explanation in Chaitanya Charitamrita. I forget which part. In Chaitanya Charitamrita, there Krishnadas Kaviraj Goswami presents the Chaturshloki verses of the Bhagavatam and explains them. And the explanation is that asat is the Mahatattva, not manifest, and sat is the manifest, the creation. So the question, someone raised this question, and I was pondering it, it's like counterintuitive. Sat means eternal, and asat means the temporary, which is our standard way of understanding. So I'll say it again. In that particular verse, the sat and asat are translated word for word as asat is the cause and sat is the effect. And then what Prabhupada explains in the purport is the Supreme is beyond both. He's neither sat or asat in the sense of material creation. So it's the same question. What's the relationship between material creation and Ishvara? What's the relationship between Prakriti and Ishvara? Which is what you're asking. Why does he need to see? Because he can see. Why does he need to hear? Why? It's everything to do with the relationship between Prakriti and Ishvara, or the creation itself. That's an unmanifest state. There's the manifest state, and neither exist in the spiritual world. Material Prakriti doesn't exist in the spiritual world, so Krishna doesn't need to see. And when there isn't even creation, what's he seeing? To have the creation happen, he desires to see, and so the things to see and the means to see are manifest. When we will go from the unmanifest to the manifest, same as this Chaturshloki verse of the Bhagavatam. You see the connection? Now, a worldly person isn't even interested in such discussions. Like this one. They're inquisitive on, what's going on in the moon, and maybe there's some valuable minerals up there, and we can use those valuable minerals to create an industry down here and make some money. Or something like that. They're interested, not the laws of nature, but the person behind the laws of nature not interested. Largely. Okay, so that's that discussion. Anything else?
Maharaj, so in this whole section about the description of creation and this manifestation of this universal form and the three aspects of it, this Adi Deva, Adhyatma and Adi Bhauta. And you see that, I find it's kind of, even though however much you read about it, it is...
It's perplexing.
Yeah. And also that the replication of the exact same process, how the universal form is different senses and everything that is developing in the universal form is replicated in the development of the universal covering. It is replicated in the development of even a embryo in the mother's womb. So, you are now explaining this other detail about the unmanifest and the manifest. And, the Lord does not need any particular faculty to see, but, by His energy, He is somehow, he definitely has a desire, and by His energy, He is manifesting this temporary material creation, and seems to be like a certain type of a process which that's not the thing that is there in the spiritual, that's not what is existing in the spiritual, but it's in a different way, a methodology which is replicated at different levels.
Yes.
Yeah, so even though he has no need for any particular sense organ to see, and I was thinking, like, there is no way with human intelligence one can understand why this mechanism. He can choose any particular way of creating the material creation, but it looks like he chooses this particular method with a sense devata in charge of every senses, and that's replicated. And so Lord can do anything He wants, but however much we try to, it looks like Bhagavatam is giving us insight into the process of creation.
Yes.
But even if we study Bhagavatam, it's not like we are going to understand the process of creation in any ways.
Well, we can... Let's go to the position of our most elevated, perfected acharyas. And then take this last statement that you made. We're not going to understand it anyways, but they understand it anyways. Now, how they understand it, or in what way, not the method, but in what way they understand it, is expressed in their commentaries. That's the way that they understand it. But then you can take the position, the unlimited cannot be known fully by the limited. But they can know a whole bunch more than we can know. And Krishna knows all.
Yeah.
But they can know a whole bunch more. And it's, how much they understand is from our little puny perspective, baffling. We don't really understand what they understand. And they can't understand everything that Krishna understands because they're not Krishna. But they can understand. Otherwise, why is it in the Bhagavatam? It's not just to spin our minds. It's, it's to reveal transcendental reality. So, to what extent did Vyasadeva understand? Is he just writing? Or is he understanding and writing what his understanding is? So he's understanding. So it's understandable, more or less, depending upon the disclosure of the Supreme and the qualification of the one who he's disclosing to. So one can know.
I have another small
Yes.
thought. You were talking about this nature of the soul, and it looks like in Chinese culture or I don't know, Korean, Japanese, everywhere it looks like there is, from their philosophers' writings, there is some understanding of the soul. It is there because the wisdom of the wisdom quotes and all those things that we see, there is some understanding that there is the spirit soul and it is transmigrating and all that. But particularly in some parts of the world, this eating habits and there is no regulative principles at all, and eat anything and everything, and drinking habits and all those things, it seems to be more like a part of their day-to-day existence. So is it that the Vedic knowledge was spread at a certain time? It was there everywhere in the world, but in some parts of the world, the culture, it developed differently, and it has deteriorated to such an extent that no matter, even if you know that there is a soul, I don't even know if their philosophy connects the soul with the Supreme, what to speak about anything else. But then the living day-to-day habits of the people, the eating habits and all that, it's detrimental to any further understanding. So how does that evolve in different parts of the world, different degrees?
Well, twice you've said the same thing, and I have a different understanding of those two things that you said. You said, it seems to you that in Eastern cultures, they have some sense of the soul. Well, it's the exception, not the rule. For example, in Buddhism, there is certainly the notion of reincarnation. But what is it that's being reincarnated? It's not the soul. In Buddhism, there's no concept of soul. So for us that accept the soul is conscious and consciousness. Remember from Sunday. For the Buddhist, consciousness is something else. What's consciousness for the Buddhist? That's a topic that I spent some time with, and maybe not here, but anyway, there's no such thing. That the only thing that exists, according to classic Buddhism, is the moment. Consciousness is momentary. And the goal is to go beyond the moment. And in that beyond the moment, there's no consciousness. There's no soul. There's no language of soul. The conception of consciousness is the moment. That's all that exists. And even that is a non-existent moment because it's gone. So the goal is to go beyond the moment into the state of nirvana. And and connecting the soul with the Supreme, there are places within, because I came across this, in China where they have a clear sense of soul. But that's the exception, not the rule. Now, beneath that, cultural direction, they don't have an explicit sense. when in the Chinese devotees had a big issue about how to translate the word consciousness, because there isn't a word in Chinese. Words are symbols, and symbols represent something. There's no concept of consciousness. There's no word for it in Chinese. So there's one group of people that said this, another group of people that said that, and they bashed each other. Now they have, at least BBT has a policy, it's translated this way. So, those are examples that, that it seems to you that in these Oriental traditions they have a concept of the soul. Not so. However, there is a soul, and innately it resonates. The concept resonates, although they don't have language for it, and it takes a lot for them compared to us to have faith in the existence of a soul beyond the body. But they have mode of goodness sense, and that makes it easier. And we have, the other modes prominent, makes it more difficult. Now, there was a second thing that you said several times.
About this eating habits.
Yeah. Those, yes, thank you. Those who, the philosophies of, at least the philosophies of China probably, and the other Oriental philosophies, they have eating habits that are in the mode of goodness. They don't eat anything, everything. There are persons that eat anything, everything, but, Confucius and other such people, they were very, very strict and circumspect about their eating habits. So, not everybody was a follower of Confucius, not everybody was in the mode of goodness, but there certainly were such people. Amongst the cultured, or whatever you want to say, civilized or elevated personalities, they were very circumspect, and they were powerful. So many people followed them simply because they were powerful, and they looked up to them. In principle. So there were 2 points that you repeated, and then where the.
I was thinking the general public in that kind of cultures, not like Confucius, but ordinary people who seems to be having the eating all type of wild animals and all that, and anything and everything. So even if
But it's not the case. There are many. There's large numbers of people in China, for example, and in Japan and other Oriental countries, large numbers of people, and they're conscientious about their followers of their great sadhus or saints or acharyas or leaders, high thinkers. There are many people, cultured people, that live like that. Then there's less. But it's not, by and large, people are indiscriminate.
Yeah, I was thinking even if they do have a knowledge about soul and to connect with the Supreme, if those habits are not refined.
They're not refined. But just Kali Yuga, Kali Yuga. I think I want to end because it's 20 minutes before 9. Srila Prabhupada ki. What? Online questions. Tomorrow morning.